It was the winter of 1943, somewhere in the cold, steel-gray waters of the North Atlantic, when the hunters of the deep, Germany's feared U-boats, began to realize that something had changed. For years they had ruled those icy seas, striking merchant convoys with torpedoes and vanishing beneath the waves before destroyers could retaliate. But now, as the convoy escorts charged across the white-capped ocean, a new sound echoed through the sonar headphones of the Allied crews, rapid, rhythmic pings that foretold death. The British and American sailors called their new secret weapon the Hedgehog, a name that sounded almost harmless, yet for the men trapped inside a U-boat, it was the most terrifying sound in the world. The Hedgehog was not born in the comfort of a laboratory but in desperation. By 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its breaking point. German U-boats, led by ruthless commanders like Otto Kretschmer and Erich Topp, had nearly strangled Britain's lifeline, sinking thousands of tons of Allied shipping every month. Convoy after convoy burned on the horizon, and Churchill himself admitted that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him. Depth charges, the main anti-submarine weapon, were powerful but crude. They exploded in wide patterns, shaking the sea but rarely hitting their mark. Destroyer crews dropped them in guesswork, hoping the blast radius would crush a submarine's hull. Most of the time, it didn't. The sea swallowed the sound, the U-boat slipped away, and the hunters became the hunted once more. Then came a quiet revolution. A team of British engineers at the Admiralty's anti-submarine experimental establishment in Fairlie, Scotland, asked a simple but radical question: what if, instead of exploding near a submarine, a weapon could strike it directly? Their idea was a forward-firing mortar array that launched dozens of small, contact-fused bombs ahead of a ship. The pattern would rain down in front of the destroyer, allowing the sonar to maintain contact right up to impact, something impossible with depth charges, which forced ships to lose sonar contact when they passed over the target. The first tests were spectacular. The 24 spigot-launched bombs leapt from the ship like angry hornets, arcing gracefully before plunging into the sea. When they struck a submerged target, the result was instant and final. The engineers called it the Hedgehog, because of the weapon's bristling array of barrels on deck, but for the Germans, it was a weapon that made the ocean itself lethal. By early 1943, the Hedgehog was being installed on every new Allied escort, corvettes, destroyers, even small frigates. The change was immediate and brutal. In the first 3 months of deployment, confirmed U-boat kills skyrocketed. For the first time, Allied sonar operators could track a submarine continuously, even during attack runs. The sequence was terrifyingly efficient: a sonar ping, the rapid calculation of range and bearing, the cry of "Fire Hedgehog." And then silence. No roaring explosion, no thunder underwater, just the splash of dozens of projectiles disappearing beneath the waves. Then, sometimes only seconds later, a deep metallic crack followed by a column of black oil and wreckage rising from the depths. U-boat crews began to speak in whispers about the new weapon. Survivors told tales of sudden, pinpoint attacks that left no time to dive deeper or evade. It was like being stabbed in the dark, one captured officer recalled. No warning. Only impact. For the German captains, disbelief turned into dread. The Atlantic that once felt like their hunting ground had become a death trap. Every time they surfaced to charge batteries, they risked detection from radar and sonar. Every time they dove to escape, they feared the Hedgehog's reign of death. Commanders reported losing entire wolf packs without a trace. Admiral Donitz, head of the U-boat arm, raged in frustration. His once invincible submariners now fell prey to invisible, unstoppable hunters. Even when his engineers tried countermeasures, deeper dives, decoys, new coatings, it didn't matter. The Hedgehog's contact-only design meant that unless it hit the submarine, it didn't explode, denying Allied ships the telltale bubble plumes that used to reveal a miss. To the Germans, it seemed supernatural: silent ships approaching in the fog, then sudden destruction. Each success reinforced the Allies' dominance. Convoy escorts that once acted defensively now hunted aggressively. The Hedgehog allowed them to strike first and vanish before any counterattack. As the months passed, Allied statistics told the grim story: U-boat losses climbing, merchant sinkings falling. For the men inside those claustrophobic steel coffins, the psychological pressure was unbearable. Every sonar ping echoed like a death knell. Veterans of earlier patrols, who once mocked the British tin cans, now prayed never to hear the calm voice from the hydrophone saying, "Multiple splashes overhead." The Hedgehog had changed the rules of undersea warfare in 90 seconds flat, the time between launch and detonation that decided whether hundreds of feet below the surface, men lived or died. And yet, the true genius of the Hedgehog wasn't just its firepower, it was its psychology. The weapon turned the predator-prey dynamic upside down. The U-boat commanders, trained to stalk, ambush, and vanish, now faced a relentless enemy that could track, pursue, and strike without hesitation. Their tactical manuals became obsolete over. By the spring of 1943, the cold Atlantic had turned into a graveyard of steel. The once proud wolf packs of Admiral Donuts, names that had terrorized Allied shipping routes like Seawolf, Vorwärts, and Stürmer, were now being shredded by destroyers armed with a strange, bristling weapon that fired silence instead of thunder. The Hedgehog had rewritten the playbook of undersea warfare, and no one felt that shock more than the U-boat captains themselves. Men who had once stalked convoys under the moonlit waves with ruthless precision now found themselves on the defensive, their confidence evaporating with every sonar ping that echoed through their steel hulls. Before the Hedgehog, a U-boat's survival depended on mathematics and instinct. After firing a torpedo spread, the captain ordered a crash dive, then waited for the inevitable counterattack, depth charges that thundered all around but rarely found their target. It was terrifying, yes, but survivable. The explosions were random, pressure waves rolling through the hull like a storm. A skilled captain could dive deeper, change course, and wait it out. But the Hedgehog stripped away that thin layer of luck. It didn't rely on chance or shock waves, it relied on accuracy. The moment sonar fixed your bearing, the destroyer didn't need to guess. It fired its salvo forward, 24 projectiles arcing in a perfect pattern, spreading across a 100-foot radius. Each one carried a contact fuse, waiting for a touch of steel. The U-boat could dive, twist, or run silent, but the Hedgehog's pattern rained straight down over its predicted path. If even one struck the hull, it was over in an instant. No warning, no roar, no hope. In May 1943, the month U-boat crews would later call Black May, the ocean itself seemed to rebel against them. Convoy ONS-5, a slow, lumbering fleet of merchant ships sailing from Britain to North America, became the test ground for this new weapon. For 5 days and nights, over 30 German submarines tried to tear the convoy apart. They succeeded in sinking 13 ships, but they paid the highest price yet. Allied destroyers and corvettes, many freshly equipped with Hedgehog mortars and improved radar, turned the tables. In just 48 hours, 11 U-boats were destroyed. The pattern was always the same: a sonar contact, a rush of engines, then silence, until oil and debris surfaced minutes later. Survivors were few, the attacks happened too fast for escape. One British sailor later recalled, "We used to dread seeing torpedo wakes. Now they feared hearing our sonar." It was no longer a battle of strength, it was a battle of science, precision, and time. 90 seconds. That's all it took for the Hedgehog to decide the fate of men who had once commanded the ocean. Back in Germany, Admiral Karl Donitz struggled to comprehend what was happening. The U-boat arm had been his pride, his masterpiece. He had trained his captains to think like wolves, patient, cunning, ruthless. But how could even a wolf fight when the forest itself had turned against it? Reports from survivors painted a picture of horror. U-boats destroyed without a single audible explosion. Crews thrown violently against the bulkheads by sudden impacts. Hulls cracking under pressure before anyone realized they'd been hit. Engineers suspected the British had developed a new kind of underwater missile. The truth was simpler, and more terrifying. The Hedgehog didn't explode near you. It exploded on you. The Allies, sensing victory, doubled down. The Royal Navy's Western Approaches Command, based in Liverpool, refined new tactics known as creeping attack. Two escort ships worked together, one held sonar contact, the other crept forward at low speed, silent as death, ready to fire a Hedgehog barrage the moment coordinates aligned. The U-boat never saw it coming. Allied scientists improved sonar sets, allowing detection even in rough seas. American destroyer escorts began using the same method, nicknaming it deadly silence. With the Hedgehog, they didn't need brute force. They needed patience, precision, and nerves of steel. Within months, the statistics were undeniable, U-boat losses soared to unsustainable levels. In 1 week of May alone, 41 German submarines were sunk. Dönitz recalled his boats, hoping to regroup, but the damage was done. To the men aboard those doomed submarines, it felt like the ocean had betrayed them. The North Atlantic was once their ally, its storms and fog hiding their approach. But now the enemy could see and hear through the water itself. The sonar pings, once harmless, had become a death sentence. When the Hedgehog pattern splashed into the sea, every man inside the submarine froze, counting the seconds, waiting for impact. Some prayed. Some screamed. Others just stared at the depth gauge, watching numbers fall and pressure climb. 90 seconds. That's how long it took for a destroyer to erase a crew that had survived dozens of patrols. And when the silence returned, the Allied sailors knew what had happened: another contact lost, another U-boat gone, another small victory in a war of steel and shadows. The Hedgehog didn't just sink submarines, it shattered morale. Captured officers confessed they had no counter for it. Their sonar decoys, called bold canisters, failed to fool the weapon. Their deeper dives were useless, the mortars could reach them anywhere within a few hundred feet. Even the new Type XXI submarines, faster and stealthier, could not guarantee survival once detected. For the first time, Dönitz's captains feared the surface. They avoided engagement, prioritized survival over attack. That fear spread like an infection through the ranks, weakening the once iron will of the U-Bootwaffe. Allied commanders noticed. They called it the breaking of the pack. By late 1943, the Atlantic War had changed forever. Merchant losses plummeted, Allied supply lines stabilized, and the invasion of Europe became possible. By 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was no longer a contest of courage, it was a contest of innovation. The days when raw nerve and instinct could save a submarine commander were gone. Now, survival depended on which side could think faster, build smarter, and strike first. The Hedgehog had proved that precision was deadlier than power, that a small, silent burst of contact bombs could do what thousands of depth charges had failed to accomplish in years of warfare. What began as a desperate experiment on a British test range had evolved into the blueprint for modern naval warfare. And as the Allied engineers refined their designs, the Germans found themselves trapped in a technological race they could no longer win. In the months following Black May, Allied research centers across Britain and America became hives of restless innovation. The success of the Hedgehog had exposed both its brilliance and its limitations. It was devastatingly accurate, but it could only strike targets at a limited range and depth. It worked best in shallow waters or mid-depth chases, but the U-boats were learning to dive deeper, using thermal layers and ocean currents to mask their signatures. So, scientists began to imagine a weapon that could do what the Hedgehog could not, a mortar that could reach deeper, hit harder, and explode with mathematical certainty. Out of this vision was born the Squid. It was the Hedgehog's bigger, meaner cousin, a triple-barreled anti-submarine mortar that could launch three 390-pound charges in unison, each one timed to detonate at a precise depth determined by sonar calculation. Unlike the Hedgehog, which relied on direct contact, the Squid detonated in a predicted kill zone, a box of water where the U-boat was most likely to be. The combination of sonar tracking and precise depth detonation turned the ocean into a giant firing range, and every shot was calibrated to destroy. By the time the Squid entered full service in late 1944, the German U-boat arm was gasping for survival. Donitz had pushed for technological salvation, new snorkel systems to let subs run underwater longer, new radar detectors to spot Allied aircraft, and of course, the revolutionary Type XXI U-boat, which promised unmatched speed and stealth. But it was too late. The Allies had built a web of death across the Atlantic. Long-range aircraft patrolled the skies, radar-equipped destroyers roamed the sea lanes, and beneath the surface lurked sonar-guided weapons that could erase a submarine in seconds. The war that had begun as a battle of endurance had become one of inevitability. Even before the Type XXI could enter mass production, the Hedgehog and Squid had already rendered its advantages meaningless. No matter how fast a submarine dove or how quiet it ran, the Allies could find it, track it, and kill it, with terrifying efficiency. And yet, amid the cold numbers of victory and loss, there was something deeply human about this technological revolution. The men who operated the Hedgehogs and Squids were not detached scientists, they were sailors, exhausted and haunted by what they'd seen. To fire a Hedgehog salvo was to know that, somewhere below, 40 or 50 men were about to die. Many Allied sailors reported feeling a strange silence after each confirmed kill. There was no explosion to cheer, no fireball to mark triumph. Just oil, debris, and sometimes a single body floating on the surface. It was efficient warfare stripped of emotion. As one British commander put it, we didn't kill them with noise, we killed them with mathematics. The Germans, for their part, tried desperately to adapt. Engineers experimented with anti-sonar coatings, magnetic decoys, and noise generators. Some U-boats were fitted with special baffles to confuse sonar echoes, others used Pillenwerfer decoy devices that released chemical bubbles to mimic submarine signatures. None of it worked for long. Allied sonar systems grew more sophisticated with every passing month, learning to distinguish between real targets and fakes. Every time a new countermeasure appeared, Allied intelligence found a way to nullify it. The U-boat captains knew it too. They joked bitterly that the ocean now belonged to the pingers, the men with sonar and hedgehogs who could hear and kill through the dark. By 1945, the Hedgehog had become more than a weapon, it was a symbol. It represented the triumph of applied science, of teamwork between engineers and sailors, of innovation under pressure. For the first time in modern warfare, the ocean's most mysterious and unpredictable battlefield was tamed by human ingenuity. The Germans had once believed that technology would secure their dominance, now, they were the ones outmatched by it. Donitz's post-war reflections were filled with grim admiration. Our enemies, he wrote, won not by courage alone, but by calculation. That calculation had a name, and it bristled like the spines of its namesake creature. The final irony was that the Hedgehog's legacy didn't end with the war. Its descendants, the Squid and later the Limbo, became the foundation for all post-war anti-submarine systems. By the 1950s, navies around the world, from Canada to Japan, were using weapons directly inspired by that humble British invention. Even the sonar-guided torpedoes and modern depth-homing missiles of today trace their ancestry back to the simple principle that made the Hedgehog so deadly: don't guess, calculate. The weapon's logic was elegant and merciless. It didn't rely on luck, only on data. And in that logic lay the blueprint for a new kind of warfare, the age of machines guided by human intellect, of precision replacing power, of silence replacing chaos. For the surviving German submariners, the end came not in a blaze of glory but in quiet resignation. They surrendered their boats in harbors they once planned to raid. Some scuttled their submarines rather than let them fall into enemy hands, their captains watching the waves swallow their pride. But the ocean didn't care. The Atlantic rolled on, indifferent and eternal. Beneath its surface lay hundreds of wrecks, tombstones of steel marking the graves of the iron wolves who had once believed themselves invincible. And above them, patrolling the waves, were the ships that had ended their reign, small, bristling silhouettes armed with a weapon that had changed history in 90 silent seconds. By the early months of 1945, the North Atlantic was a vast and silent graveyard. Beneath the gray waves lay the bones of an empire that had once prowled with feral precision, the U-Boot-Waffe, the pride of Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine. The men who had once hunted convoys with ruthless mastery were now ghosts beneath the sea, their wrecks resting in the eternal cold. The reason wasn't bravery or fate, it was technology. It was the rise of a weapon so simple, so brutally effective, that it erased the advantage of experience in a matter of seconds. The Hedgehog had begun as an experiment. By 1945, it had become the executioner of the deep. The German U-boat captains had entered the war as the elite of the elite. Men like Gunther Prien, Otto Kretschmer, and Erich Topp had written their names in legend. They stalked the night sea like wolves, hunting in packs, striking with precision, and disappearing before the enemy could retaliate. The early years of the war were theirs, the time of the hunters, when Allied convoys burned in the dark and Churchill's Britain stood on the brink of starvation. But every empire of the deep faces its tide, and when that tide turned, it came not with thunder but with the whisper of mathematics, the ping of sonar, and the splash of 24 bombs falling silently into the sea. By 1944, every surviving U-boat commander could feel the change. Patrols that once yielded easy prey now turned into nightmares. Allied escorts no longer reacted in panic, they moved with chilling precision. The moment sonar found a contact, a pattern unfolded, a quiet maneuver, a slow approach, and then, fire. The Hedgehog's mortars erupted forward, raining their deadly pattern in front of the destroyer's bow. There was no explosion to mark a miss, no trail of bubbles to betray a guess. If the bombs struck, the submarine vanished. If they didn't, the destroyer turned, recalculated, and fired again. The sea was now a chessboard, and every Allied ship a grandmaster. In January 1945, U-877 under Commander Heckler learned this lesson the hard way. Off the coast of Newfoundland, in waters shrouded by fog and sleet, the submarine attempted to surface and recharge its batteries. Allied radar picked it up within minutes. The Canadian frigate HMCS St. Thomas, equipped with a Hedgehog launcher, closed in. The sonar operator tracked the contact, calling out bearings in calm, precise tones. Bearing steady, range decreasing, hold fire, then, at the perfect range, came the order, fire Hedgehog. 24 projectiles leapt from the ship's bow like sparks, vanishing into the grey sea. 90 seconds later, the water erupted with a dull metallic crack. When the oil slick surfaced, the crew of St. Thomas knew another wolf had fallen. Only a handful of U-877's crew survived, the rest went down with their steel coffin. Such engagements were no longer rare, they were routine. Every week brought new reports of submarines lost without trace, their positions marked only by rising oil and drifting debris. The Hedgehog had given the Allies something no weapon before it had offered, certainty. No more guessing if a submarine had been destroyed, the results spoke for themselves. Destroyer crews even developed a grim saying, "No bang means a miss, a bang means they're gone." It was brutal, efficient, and merciless, everything modern warfare demanded. In German naval bases at Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and Wilhelmshaven, morale crumbled. The sailors who once swaggered through port towns now walked with hollow eyes. They knew the statistics, over 70% of U-boat crews would never return home. Entire classes of submarines disappeared in weeks. For the young recruits, many barely 20, it was a one-way voyage. Letters home were written before departure, sealed with hope, and often delivered to grieving families before the ink was dry. "The sea takes everyone eventually," one captain had told his men, "but now, it takes us faster." Admiral Karl Donitz, by then commanding the entire German Navy, faced an impossible truth. His submariners still fought with courage, but courage no longer mattered. The Atlantic had turned against them. Allied hunter-killer groups roamed the ocean with radar, sonar, aircraft, and hedgehogs working in perfect harmony. Every technological advantage stacked against the U-boats like a wall of steel and science. Donit's new Type XXI submarines, the so-called electroboats, were marvels of engineering, faster underwater than on the surface, quieter, and deadlier. But they came too late. Only a handful ever saw combat before Germany's surrender. By then, the Allies had rewritten the laws of undersea warfare. The Hedgehog was more than a weapon, it was a statement. It proved that the age of guesswork and brute force was over. Where depth charges had relied on chaos, the Hedgehog thrived on precision. It turned anti-submarine warfare from an art into a science. Allied scientists calculated trajectories, depth, and spread angles with exacting detail, transforming every destroyer into a mobile laboratory of death. The Germans tried to counter with improved sonar jammers, decoys, and stealth coatings, but nothing could stop the mathematics of destruction. Once sonar had you in its sights, your fate was written. And yet, amid all this mechanical perfection, the war at sea remained deeply human. Sailors still froze on deck in sub-zero winds. Sonar operators still sweated over their screens, straining to separate real echoes from false ones. And when a Hedgehog strike found its mark, there was no cheer, only silence. The men aboard the destroyers knew that beneath them, in the black depths, 100 lives had just ended. Some prayed quietly. Others turned away. The ocean swallowed both victors and victims alike, indifferent to human triumph or tragedy.